World of RPGs, Episode 15, Germany, Part 3 of 3. Welcome to the World of RPGs, a podcast in which we travel around the globe and learn about the local role-playing game scenes. I'm your host, Mo Bortz, and in Episode 15, we're going to Germany. And yes, I always record this intro new. This is the last part of 3, so please don't start here if you don't want to be confused. I kind of use these introductions to talk about my own gaming history, I guess. So I think I also summarize some of it in episode 0. But when I was in my 20s, I left German language games, whether original German ones or translations of mostly English games, totally behind and only focused on the English language stuff. I did play some Engel at a convention once and tried to run a De Genesis campaign. But as Germans know, that doesn't really go well. So basically, I had no clue what was happening or what has happened in the German gaming scene since the 2010s. And most of the games we're talking about in this one are new to me. This episode, therefore, has some deeper descriptions of some unique German indie games. And I'm a bit sad because of the timing, because I recorded these interviews just after I visited Germany for a week, and so I could have gotten them there, and now I have to wait until I visit again. We begin in Berlin with a publisher who has German and English versions of their games.
Hi, my name is Andrea Rick. I am in Berlin, Germany, and I am a game designer, a graphic designer, a translator, an editor, and sometimes also an illustrator. And I'm the owner of the publishing company Block Bunny Games, which is a one-person or one-bunny TTRPG publishing company in Germany. So I wear a lot of hats because I've, of course, also wear the hat for bookkeeping and marketing and project management and everything else you do when you're a one-person company. And I'm also a person who really, really likes playing TTRPGs of almost all kinds.
And how did you get into TTRPGs?
This pandemic began in 2020, and I couldn't do lots of my previous hobbies anymore because we're in person and close contact, and I couldn't do that anymore. And so I needed a different new hobby. And then I was like, wait, there's this role playing. I was aware of it a long time and thought that's something I would like. And then I was like, okay. And then the time I asked around on Twitter, like, where would I go if I wanted to try this role-playing thing and find something that is queer friendly? And then people recommended various platforms and forums and whatever. And there was one person who said, you know what, I'm actually running a one-shot like this week, 2 days later or something, and I still have room. And I was like, okay, sign me up. That was basically my first game session. And the one thing that left a very positive impression for me was that he had pre-made characters and all of them had gender neutral names. And he specifically said you can change the name and gender however you like and make it fit who you want to play. And that for me was very, very positive. And to feel like, yes, okay, I'm welcome as a queer person. Somebody has thought of this. And I don't have to explain things. I don't have to fight for space. I don't have to prove that I belong here or something. And so that was a very, very good first impression. And I was immediately hooked. And then I signed up for 1,000, which is obviously an exaggeration, like many, many, many more games, everything I could find on all the servers, all the Discords, all the communities, played in English and in German and with like lots of different people and lots of different games. And very quickly passed like over 100 different games since then. I haven't checked the number, but it's probably, I don't know, somewhere above 100 by now. And then quickly I started running games also again, which also was not quite typical because my first game that I ran was a Lasers and Feeling Sack. And I could not use any of the how to GM a game information I found because they were all written for different kinds of games and different kinds of GM styles. So I basically had to make up things as I went along, and that was fun. And then I was like, I would like there to be a Lasers and Feelings hack, but the one that I want doesn't exist yet. And I'm like, maybe I could write it. So I started writing games, and then things kept escalating quickly. And so in summer of 2022, I founded Plot Bunny Games, and now I also publish not just my own stuff, but also other people's games and translations into German as well. And it's become like my main job. And that's kind of the short version. What can I say? I'm a fast learner. It's not better to be faster. It's not better to have been there longer. It's just different. I always run into people who as we all did back in the 90s when we were gaming. And I was like, I don't know what you did. I was doing different things in the 90s. I was going to punk concerts and organizing like queer events and doing lots of other things, but I wasn't playing games. But I'm the same age. So you would think that I've been around for a long time, but I actually haven't. So, I mean, in life, yes, but not in TTRPGs. That's sometimes a weird asynchronicity that I have with people.
Concerning Plot Bunny Games, so you have stuff in German and in English there, don't you? So maybe you can give a short overview of what you have.
Yes, of course. I'm skipping the games that I wrote before I founded Plot Bunny Games. They still exist. You can still get them, but they're only available as digital versions. So I'm skipping those. And the first game that I published in print for Plot Bunny Games was the German version of Bunny We Bought a Dungeon. And I wrote it together with Jasmin Neitzel for the German Free RPG Day last year. We were like, yeah, let's do something small that to sort of introduce the company. And it was a complete surprise hit. People love this game. I was like, okay, I didn't quite expect it to be that much of a hit, but lots of people like it. And I think we managed to appeal to lots of people at the same time. And we're calling it a GM-less OSR story game. And basically it's a GM-less game and you're playing a group of bunnies who bought a dungeon to move in there together. And during the game, you basically draw a map of the dungeon and tell the story of like how you explore the rooms and how you furnish them. And sometimes you meet people who are already there and then you have to figure out how to live with them or maybe get rid of them if you don't want to live with them. And you end up with a dungeon map and hopefully a nice story. It's flexible in length. So it's great if you want to play just for an hour, or you have kids that are very impatient and don't have a long attention span. You can also play with kids. And it works for all ages, basically. And it's great fun. I'm very happy that so many people like it. So that was the first thing that appeared in print. And the first thing we crowdfunded was a game. I'm showing these to you on the video, but I know it's not in the podcast. The first crowdfunding we ran was Fräulein Bernburgs Pensionat für junge Damen, which is the much, much, much extended, completely rewritten German version of Miss Bernburg's Finishing School for Young Ladies, which is the first German Firebrands game that was ever written and published. The second version is not the first because there's another one that The King is Dead appeared in translation by a different publisher. But this one, the first version of this is the very first Firebrands game in German. And I originally wrote it during a game jam that I co-organized and like in 3 weeks. And it was a lot of just putting stuff together. And then like a year later, I was like, I should rewrite this. I should rework it. It could be better than it is. And it would be an interesting first project for Plot Bunny Games. And I knew it was relatively short and it was German and it was an original. It was just me who wrote it. And I have an illustrator, somebody who made the cover, which is Christiane Ebrecht. But I did all the other illustrations and everything else, layout and game design, obviously. And so I was like, okay, so I'm not dependent on anybody else. Nobody else has to keep any deadlines. It's just me. So it's sort of small and manageable as a project. And of course it wasn't, because the minute I started rewriting, I kept thinking of more stuff that I wanted to add. And so now I have a complete chapter about like what even are Firebrands games, because they're not as well known in the German TTRPG community as they are in the English speaking community, because we don't have them yet unless we read the English versions. And I added a chapter about like troubleshooting Firebrands games because people run into the same problems. And some of that is just expectation management. And some of that is just stuff you have to rethink how you play games. So I added that. And now it's become like a 124-page book. And I plan to translate that back into English at some point, but I don't have a deadline yet. And I should probably say what it's about. And it's a Firebrands game about the interpersonal drama between young upper class ladies at a finishing school, which is sort of a boarding school for like upper class young ladies, young women between sort of 16-ish to 22-ish. And you can sort of figure out where in the ages you are too. It asks questions about like, what do you do when you have lots of class privilege, but also have lots of gender non-privilege, and how do you deal with that? Like, how do you figure out what your life can be? How do you relate to other women who make different choices? What can you learn from each other? How do you have conflict? So yeah, that's like a Firebrands game. It means it has lots of different scenes, and you do always decide what scene to play, and then you do a little setup. And then you have lists with suggestions for dialogue options and things you can do. And you pick something from those lists, or you make up something yourself. Every option pushes the action forward, so you don't have like this empty conversation where nobody does anything, but it always goes forward. And you play as many scenes as you like, and then you end the game, or you do a few shots and play several sessions of the game. That also works. Then we did Viva la Queerbar, which I wrote with together with Sandra Dahlhoff. It's a slice of life game. It's a story game about a queer bar or a queer cafe and the team who runs it. And basically it's about the pleasures and the struggles of being part of a queer community. And mechanically, it's a descendant from the Queen game, so it's inspired by For the Queen and similar games. And instead of printing it on cards, we decided to map it onto a regular card deck and just have lists with the questions, and you pull a regular card and look up the question, because it's so much cheaper to produce, because it would have been a tiny print run. And tiny print runs with cards are basically super expensive. And then the game would have been so expensive that the people we wanted it to buy couldn't have afforded it anymore. And so we decided, let's do the compromise and let's do the zine-sized version. And that also means that it's a lot easier to play online, because the experience is a lot more similar to when you sit at a table together. Yeah, that is a game. Basically, it's an archive of our own queer bar experiences and organizing these spaces and being part of these spaces and going to them. And we kind of wanted to put it into a game form so other people could experience this. If you're not queer, but you're interested, then you also have a little history essay at the end where you can learn a little bit about the role of queer bars. And you have like, I think 23 mini portraits of real queer bars and queer cafes, mostly in the US and a few in the UK and some in Germany. So I have the Schwule Baustelle from Hamburg, some from Munich, and another one in Hamburg. And the rest are either historical, some in Berlin. I mean, most of the historical bars were in Berlin, so that's just accurate. And of course, it's a selection based on who we are and what we know, and there could be a lot more. And I just had limited space and had to make hard choices to see which ones to include and which ones to leave out. And that's Viva la Queerbar. And then, now I'm not so completely sure about the order of things anymore, but also Jasmin Neitzel and I wrote the sister game to Bunny, We Bought a Dungeon, which is called Dolly, We Bought a Dream House. And it's inspired by the biggest movie of the year 2023, which is, of course, the Barbie movie. So now you're not playing bunnies, but you're playing a group of dollies. And you, of course, when you're making a character, you choose a style and a hairstyle and a job. And then you basically explore and furnish your dream house. And it has the same basic mechanic, but of course, we made completely new roll tables for the options when you figure out the rooms. And I also drew some dollies for the illustrations for that game. And then I think was the first translation. And oh yeah, I should say that all of the games I mentioned so far We published in both German and English. So Viva la Cueva is in German and English, and Bunny We Bought a Dungeon is in German and English, and Dolly We Bought a Dream House is in German and English. And then there is Follow, which is by Ben Robbins, which is the first, in quotation marks, proper translation we published, because that game, of course, exists in English already. And we made the German version and published that. And as part of the crowdfunding, I could hire 12 German TTRPG authors and designers to write additional quests. And a quest is basically the unit. It's like an adventure for this game. And you play a group of people who are on a quest together, and you play to find out whether you stick together or whether you fall apart during this process of achieving your goal, because of course you have different approaches, different secondary goals, different relationships, and like it has 18 quests in the original game, which have a little bit of world building, basically just character keywords. You choose a role and you choose 2 wishes you have, and then you start playing, and you play like 3 challenges, and every challenge has like a game per main character. So, and these units of play are basically called a quest. And we had 12 German authors write 12 additional quests. And I'm super excited. So we have like lots of additional material for this game that I also plan to translate back into English, because I know that Follow and generally Ben Robbins games have a solid fan base, and we would love to share this material with them as well. And there's some really good options. Like we have a road trip, we have a dungeon, and then we have the defense where you play the people in the dungeon who live in the dungeon and defend it against the adventurers. And then we have a move where you move house. We have the expedition. We have a party where you organize the party, and lots of other cool things. And they're all brilliant. And I want to play all of them at some point. And that was Follow.
When you add some quests there by authors from Germany, are there any German-specific things in there, do you think? So when you translate it, anything that where you think it's culturally specific?
I think the one that's probably most German is the move, where you move house. Because I think, if I remember correctly, there are some bureaucracy options that feel very German to me. But the rest of them, I think, work pretty much in other settings as well. Either they're a fantasy setting anyway. And also, I think most people are probably also influenced by like US or like international media. And so I think we have a tendency to not think specifically in German settings when we write stuff like that. I have some stuff that I wrote for Brindlewood Bay that is super German, for Plot Bunny Games, that is super German, and that I keep thinking of like, could I translate that? And I'm like, I have no idea how to explain the whole cultural context around the things that I wrote, because I would have to add a whole, I don't know, introduction explaining everything. And then it kind of loses the impact it has for a German reader who knows these things and knows these people and knows these places. And I kind of regret it, because it's like, you kind of would like to share it, but I still haven't figured out how to get this across. Like I have one that is set at a ballroom dance competition. And it's a mixture of like the very German, I don't even know, the Vereinsmeierei, like when you're having a club and you have all the rules and all the bureaucracy of the club, but it's also like the glamour of ballroom and the glitter and the performance stuff of that. And when these two things come together, to me, it's a super interesting clash of different aesthetics and cultures. And I'm not sure how this works in, for example, US American setting or a British setting, because also the ballroom scene there works completely different. They wouldn't have some of the issues I put in there.
One of the things you said, which sounded very American to me, was a road trip. Because in Germany, if you drive for 1 hour, you're in the next big city. You can't really do a road trip in Germany.
That's true. I mean, I remember like holidays when I was a child. Like everybody gets stuffed in the car, and then you drive, and either you drive north towards sort of Scandinavia, or you drive south and then you go to like, I don't know, somewhere in France or Spain. And that can be a road trip in that you have to do an overnight stop at some point. But of course, we don't have these like massive highways with nothing for miles and miles and miles. That's a very American image. But I think the Quest works for both of these settings. I think you can also take a road trip in a European setting if you want to play that. So should I continue with the games? I have two more. I have a little game that in German is called Das Albtraumschiff. And in English, it's called The Lovecraft Boat. This is another game by Jasmin Neitzel and me, which we wrote for this year's German Free TTRPG Day. And basically, it's Octodad meets The Love Boat, or Octodad meets Traumschiff in German. And you're playing monsters, and you have eaten the crew of a cruise ship. And now you need to stay undiscovered. And so you need to take over the crew jobs while the cruise is happening. So it's a game that derives humor from monsters who have neither the education nor the anatomy to actually do these jobs properly. And mechanically, it's a hack of lasers and feelings. You create a monster, you create some details about your cruise ship, and the GM can basically roll for an adventure and get something like during a fashion show, a group of nosy seniors want to repair the sonar device, which would lead to a hungry deity devouring the earth. And then you need to figure out how to prevent that. We published it as a little foldable flyer in German. So it looks like a brochure you would pick up at a travel agency maybe. And in English, it only exists as a PDF. And I took a lot of care in, this is something you can't see in the podcast, but you can look up on our website or on the itch page. The German title font is similar to the title font of the German TV series Das Traumschiff. And the English one is similar to the title for Love Boat. So you would have this visual reminder of something you may be familiar with if you know the media. We're sort of riffing on with this kind of parody that we wrote.
Okay, now I understand. I worked a year as an editor, so I really look out for fonts and typos. And I was like, okay, that's a good pun. I looked on the itch.io page, which I'm also linking in the show notes. And I thought, why is it in two different fonts? That doesn't make sense. But okay, yeah, I've never watched these shows, so...
Yeah, that's why. And I was like, should I leave it? Because I did the German version first. And I was like, but people won't have this sense of, oh my, I've seen something like that. And because I couldn't find the original font, I basically redrew the shapes like in Illustrator, just so we could get something similar just for the title. And that's why they're different in this particular game. And the newest game where we just fulfilled the crowdfunding is Against the Monster, or Gegen das Monster in German, which is another Descended from the Queen story game. And this one is about Monster Hunt, the good of the monster and the monstrosity of the hunters. And it's meant to complicate the binarity of good versus evil, good hunters and evil monster. And sort of, ask questions about that. And are you really sure that you're the good ones? And are you really sure that the monster is the bad one? And that you should really fight it. And it has, as I said, similar mechanics as Viva la Cuerva and very cool monster illustrations by yours truly and on every page. And I really enjoyed drawing them. The illustrations are in some sort of carbon pencil style and very sketchy, very rough, and I really enjoy the vibe that it brings to the game. It feels a little bit old schooly without being like typical OSR aesthetics. And of course, it's a story game. You don't roll dice at all.
The pictures you showed me looked a bit like shadow play to me.
Yeah, I was inspired by, I had this image of, do you know the old Nosferatu movie? There's this one very, very famous picture where you just see sort of the silhouette and then you see the hand, which is very long fingers. And that was one of the images I had in my mind when I drew these pictures and sort of wanted to capture this very reduced black silhouettes, white background kind of style and the actual images ended up having a little more texture in them to give it some dimension. Yeah, that's the art style of that game. So basically you can choose whatever monster you want to hunt. You can choose whatever setting you want to hunt. There are a few setup questions at the beginning where you make some decisions about that. And so if you want to hunt a dragon or a vampire or a tentacle monster or some artificial intelligence or something completely different, that's all possible with the game. And everything else, basically the characters develop during the game as you answer questions, because all the game does is ask you questions. That's the newest one, and we founded this for Zine Month this year, and I just sent out all the packages ahead of deadline, ahead of schedule, once again, yay. And I'm super happy with the way it ended up. And yeah, that's, I think, everything we have published through Plot by Games so far. And I keep saying we. I mean, we is basically I. I just started using we in the beginning because I was like, well, I'm not doing this completely alone. I have like freelancers who do like editing and proofreading, sometimes illustrations. Yasmin Neitzel usually consults me when I do crowdfundings. I talk things over with her. So it feels weird to always say I, because I'm not doing this alone. But technically, I am the company. There's nobody else in the company. I have all the jobs. I do all the things. I'm the only one who's responsible when things go wrong. So that sometimes I feel like it has been a little bit misleading in the beginning, because I started to default to we when I talk about the company, but it's actually just me. The one thing they're working on, and this is a we because I'm doing it together with a co-translator, is the German version of Dream Askew, Dream Apart by Avery Alder and Benjamin Rosenbaum. And I'm super, super happy and excited to bring these two games in one book to the German audience, because I really, really love them. And I think they're fantastic. And I can't wait to finish that and bring it to the German audience.
Yeah, I have the book in English, but I don't get Powered by the Apocalypse games, so I have difficulties wrapping my head around them. And I actually contacted Avery Alder about I think she sent it to me directly or something. So I wrote back something like, thanks for your games or something. Yeah.
I mean, it's Powered by the Apocalypse, but it's actually, this book started the Belonging Outside Belonging subsection of Powered by the Apocalypse games. So it founded a design family all of its own. My first Belonging Outside Belonging game that I played was Wonder Home, which I loved as a book to read. And then I tried to play it. I was completely lost because I had no idea how to make this happen. And then I read Dream Askew, Dream Apart. And I was like, this is how they're supposed to work, because this is the book that explains how this system is going to work and how to transition into it from a more traditional style of gameplay and how it's meant to feel. And then there's long examples of play, and that was super helpful to me. And I wish I had read this first, because it would have made my life a lot easier with other Belonging Outside Belonging games. But I think that's something that Avery Alder does very, very well, is like explaining things and teaching games and enabling you to teach these games to other people.
Do you think there would be some kind of, because Belonging Outside Belonging is also considers certain topics. Do you think there could be something specific? Well, I don't want to say the German market, but specific to the German gaming experience, which would be a Belonging Outside Belonging game?
Oh, that's interesting. I have to think about that, because I keep thinking, like, is there a Belonging Outside Belonging game I would want to write? And what, like, groups of people, does it make sense to have this kind of game? And I think you could write a game. Obviously, I couldn't write the game, but somebody could write a game of Belonging Outside Belonging. I think about maybe migrant communities in Germany, where you kind of belong, but you kind of also always hear like that you don't really belong, because people keep othering you and keep sort of suggesting that you're not quite as German as other people are. And I think that could work. But as a white person, and I've never been anything but a German, I'm not the one to write it. I'm not a migrant. But I could imagine that might work. And the other thing that I've been thinking about, but I'm not entirely sure whether that's German specific, is I would love to have a belonging outside belonging game about disabled people. Not entirely sure where it would be set or who would write it, but I think that's another community of people who have at least in some places, an idea of themselves as a community, and also sort of are always pushed to the margins of you're not quite belonging, you're not quite part of the mainstream. And I think you could make something with that. I'm not sure I'm the person to do it, but I kept thinking about this fantastic documentary called Crip Camp. I think it was on Netflix. I'm not entirely sure it's there anymore, but if you can watch it, you should definitely watch it because it's fantastic. It's about the beginnings of the disability rights community in the US. And they are talking about it's like a summer camp with lots of disabled people and how they started to form connections and like talk to other disabled people and found that they have stuff in common, even if their disabilities are very different. And then it goes on to tell the story of they occupied like a political building in the US to fight for what became the Americans with Disabilities Act. And somebody else knows this history better than I do. I just remember the movie, and it was like very much this, okay, we're a community, we're helping each other, we're taking care of each other across our differences, and we are separate because we're told we don't belong. And I think that might work as well. But then again, I think you can probably take the belonging outside belonging mechanic outside of this topic, because I mean, in Wanderhome, the difference between the group of animals who are wandering is not as clear compared to the animals who are staying in certain places. It's not quite clear why they're different. So I think you could do something with the mechanics that's not necessarily about marginalization. But that's where my mind goes first, because that's a topic I think about a lot and that affects me in my life a lot and that I think about a lot as a game designer as well. But I will keep thinking about this question, definitely, whether there's more specific German context.
There was one gaming thing I actually didn't know, so maybe you have to explain it to me. Firebrands games, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah, sure. Firebrands is one of the other subfamilies of Powered by the Apocalypse. And the first Firebrands game was Mobile Frame Zero Firebrands by Miguel Baker and Vincent Baker. I think it was inspired by some other game, which is called Mobile Frame Zero, which I personally am not familiar with. And then they made it into Firebrands, and they came up with the idea that, you know how in Powered by the Apocalypse games you have these moves and they have a triggering condition, and then often you roll dice and then you have a result that sort of impacts the fiction. And in Firebrands, basically, you have mini games or scenes, as I call them in my game, that are much extended moves. It's like every move is a whole scene, is a whole game. And the original, for example, you have like a fight scene, or you have a dance where people dance together, or you have a conversation over food where you try to maybe make a deal or get to know people or find out secrets and have a conversation. And there's a whole family of Firebrands games that have sort of used this basic mechanic, and some are just reskins of the original, some add other mechanical elements and sort of do different things with the basic idea. And what I really like about them is that I think they really teach you how to set up a scene, because every mini game has like, how did you come to be about to have a fight or to dance together? Of course, you pick your scene partner or partners. Then it asks you like, how did you come to be here? Which allows you to sort of fill in the blanks and do some time skipping and fast forward or skip the boring parts and fill in the stuff you need to get to the scene. And then ask you, what do you notice about each other? And so you can say something like, I'm nervous, or I seem like out of breath or something. And then you give the other player something they can address or they can play towards. And then you set up like where you are you alone? Are you in a specific environment? You sketch out that, and then you start playing. And usually it's just a dialogue where you either improvise or you just use the lists that they are as an inspiration, or you can even just read the list options and it still works. They usually have something, I do this and that, and what's your reaction? Or do you react A or do you react B? So you give your partner something to respond to, and then they respond, and then they pick something. And then there's usually some sort of condition, like after 3 exchanges, or if this and that end condition is achieved, then the scene ends. And everybody who's not in the scene can always ask questions and like, tell me more about the food that you're eating, or how do you feel about that? Or what are you wearing? Or they can sometimes, depending on the mini game, they play some sort of audience role and get to sort of, for example, moderate a debate between the two players and pick questions for them to answer, or get to vote at the end who won the scenes. Some of the Firebrands games also have win-lose mechanics. That's basically the idea. It's an extended PBTA move, and you always play scenes and you choose what scene to play next, and then you decide how to get there, or you take the previous scene and think, okay, how would this develop into an intimate moment where we spend time together and maybe get closer? Or does this develop into a fight where we maybe have an argument, or we physically fight? Or do we chase each other? Or is there like a big free-for-all fight where everybody is battling, which is not obviously in the Finishing School game, but it is in other Firebrands games. Yeah, so that's the basic idea.
Is there anything you want to add before we end the recording?
I think the main thing I would like to add is that I really, really hope that the German-speaking indie design community keeps growing. I see, especially in OSR spaces, I think there's a lot happening already. I think there could be even more in story game-ish spaces, which is where I feel most comfortable and at home as a player, as a game designer. And I always want more designers, more authors, more people who try things or add things or add material to a game or write their own games. And I always try to sort of lower the barrier for people to do that. And I've done workshops of like, let's do a collective lasers and feelings hack in 2 hours. And it worked. And now we have that. And, or like explain things. And even speaking as a publisher, if I can pay people to write me like additional material for a game that exists, then now we have stuff that is in German. And then we can maybe also translate it into English because, of course, there's a market. But I wish that there are more designers in Germany who also write in German, because lots of them just stick to English because the market is bigger. But it also means that lots of people are excluded who don't speak English that well. And I always wish we could have both. Like, we should translate our game into English, or we should translate our games into German, or we should also have the German version and publish the German version, because I don't want to talk to just English speaking people about game design and cool story games. And I want more of that in German. And I also want more designers in Germany. I hope we continue to multiply and have more and be more and talk to each other and make great games together. And so there's more of a community instead of a bunch of individuals who are vaguely connected and maybe aren't even aware that the other one exists. So that's maybe one thing I could add, is I'm keeping a collection of German language material on itch.io, where I put everything I can find on that platform that is TTRPG stuff in German. If people have stuff that I haven't put in there yet, please let me know, because I really want to sort of bring people together and help people discover the variety that is there, because sometimes I think it gets lost that we even exist if we don't know each other.
Another small studio in Berlin has come to the scene with innovative rules and innovative business models.
So I'm not originally from Germany. I'm actually from Switzerland. I've grown up there and lived in Switzerland until I was 20. And since I'm now 37, I believe, I'm not entirely sure, but it should be 37. I usually don't count. I've gotten into role-playing games via Ultima Online, actually. I was playing on a role-playing free shard when I was 12 or 13. And a person who was also playing on that free shard introduced me to the concept of role-playing games that is not online or using a computer. And I was always curious how to actually start playing, because where I was growing up, there was no role-playing group anywhere to be found. So it took about 2 or 3 years until that person was able to get me to a convention. So basically, I started with 16 playing Shadowrun, third edition back then. And after that, it was mostly homebrews. So I met Thorsten through that person, also through an online project. And he was already working on his own little projects here and there. He's a bit older than me, so we're an uneven partnership when it comes to age. He's 7 years older than I am. So you are maybe 44? No, he should be 44 and I should be 37. And after that, I played here and there. I had a group playing Das Schwarze Auge for a while as a black eye. 5 sessions or so. I never quite got into it because I couldn't get into all the lore. It was just too much. And then I moved to Berlin for university. And because I had met Thorsten and we became friends, after that, I stayed in Berlin and I studied history. I studied area studies or regional studies. I'm not sure how to translate it. It was a bit of a fringe thing. Asia and Africa, decolonization. I learned some Vietnamese briefly. It didn't stick, but I was very interested in that part of the world for a while. So one of my pet interests was the Vietnam War or the Second Indochina War, or however you want to call it. And 2016, Thorsten and I were kind of slacking around, not knowing what to do. He asked, would you like to start a role-playing game studio? And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. It took a while to take off, but we kind of lived through the pandemic with it. It was very hard, and now I'm here full-time developing role-playing games in the German market, which is hard, but somehow doable. That's me. I have been playing role-playing games for 20 years now. More or less. Sometimes 4 times a week.
And before we come to the studio, maybe Thorsten, you can also introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Thorsten, and I started role-playing games into the rabbit hole diving when I was 12. That was during my high school time. A friend at school asked me, would you like to play Das Schwarze Auge with us? The Dark Eye. In Germany, it's usually The Dark Eye or Shadowrun. So in my case, it was The Dark Eye, the big German, almost monopoly at that time. And I was quite intrigued because of the mysterious name. And so I got into it and I started to play, and I played my first session and it was a disaster. It was a quite interesting disaster because we had a very bad game master, and my dwarf in the first 10 minutes of playing tried to climb over a fence, and the game master, after I failed the climbing check, pretty much left me out of the entire adventure after that because everyone else was chasing some guy, I don't know, and my dwarf was left behind, so I had to leave the room. That was something the game master back then insisted on. Fortunately, role-playing games were a lot easier to understand back then. So I took the rule books with me outside of the room. And when I came back into the game next session, I pretty much knew all the rules much better than everyone else. And that resulted in me becoming a permanent game master, the legendary forever game master. I guess since I was 12, I played about 1% of my entire role-playing time as a gamer and not as a game master. And even that 1% is rounded up. I studied graphics design, specifically 3D animation. And I went into advertisement and did some things for television shows, educational TV, stuff like that, merchandise campaigns for magazines. And I found out that this is not what I wanted to do till the end of my life. It was well-paid work, but it was completely unrewarding. Nobody ever said you did a good job, and you rarely ever saw anything of what you did. And when you did, it was mostly completely irrelevant to me, because when you animate merchandise stuff for the Barbie magazine, you are not very interested in the result of that work. At some point, I decided, hey, let's give it a shot. Let's create a game of our own. Well, I did it with my best friend. So that's how the Donner House studio came to be.
So let's hear a bit more about that studio. How did you start that and what are you doing now?
First thing is we always call ourselves the Donner House Studio and not Donner House Publishing or something like that. We don't consider ourselves as a publisher because we do not publish anyone's work but our own. We are a development studio and we just happen to publish the things we develop. Originally, we wanted to create a cyberpunk world. We put quite a lot of work into thinking everything through and started world building. But then we noticed that with the state of the world, especially politically and economically, and the way corporations evolved, we did not actually want to create a cyberpunk game anymore because we were pretty sure that if we finished it, we would probably be suicidal from depression.
Yeah, we're very good at creating worlds and holistically designing settings, and we got into creating a dystopia that was so
dark and depressing
that we just couldn't do it. And then we decided, no, we can't support a game for 5 or 10 years or whatever that is basically about how bad everything is. It was just not possible.
So we switched to fantasy, at least briefly.
Funny enough, we didn't release a fantasy game so far, but we developed an entire fantasy world. It has about 300 pages of manuscripts and about 2,500 named things on the world map. But we realized something when we published our first product, Jana Sarah's Kartentasche. Well, it's a collection of maps and adventure ideas and descriptions of all the places in there. They're all based on that fantasy world, but usable for every game master, basically, who is into some sort of fantasy game. When we published that, we simply learned, well, it's really hard to publish things. You know, the logistics of it all is just very complicated, and every new designer or publisher should really focus on logistics. It's like in the military, logistics is everything. And we just saw that we couldn't support a complicated and lore-rich fantasy world with 2 people. It's just not possible.
And without a budget, that's another problem. Because working on that second project that evolved in Jana Sarah's Kartentasche, Jana Sarah's book of maps, essentially, we also noticed how all around us, in the American RPG scene, in the British RPG scene, in the French RPG scene, and in the German RPG scene, games popped up with very ambitious goals, with the ambition to create worlds, a new fantasy world here and a new fantasy world there. And most of them died like moths to a torchlight. They came out and that's it. There mostly never came much in addition to it. And it became very clear to us to sustain such a fantasy world with a vast complexity, you need to supply it with a constant stream of further products. You need to get out a book about, for example, weapons and enemies and monsters and NPCs and location books and so on and so on and so on. And to actually do that, you would have to have half of that ready and done at the time you published the ground rules and the basic setting book, or it would lose momentum and it would just die. Yeah, that is when we accepted that this was just beyond our capability at that time. We had a relative success with the Kartentasche, with the map packs and the descriptions, and the books turned out beautifully. They turned out beautifully, but economically unsustainable.
Yeah, there's also the point, as a studio, we only print locally. That means in Berlin for us, with a printing house that has been our partner for 6 years now. They're specialized in eco-printing. All of our products are produced sustainably, ecologically, and regionally, but also means that we pay German prices when we produce. But it's important to us because we want to support our local economy and local workplaces, because it's just, role-playing games are about community. And if you create role-playing games that are basically just money-making concepts that are not about community creation and creating connection between people and furthering creativity, then we don't want to do it. So we kind of chained ourselves to some heavy weights before we started running. And that's also secondarily also the problem when the pandemic started. We just took off. We decided in 2019, so this side project we're doing, this role-playing game studio, because we hadn't done anything big in any form before, let's do that full time. Let's make that our work. So we printed Jana Sarah's Kartentasche. Then we thought we might get easy credit because the economy was booming and credit was cheap and everything was fine. And 4 months later, we got hit with the pandemic. It was a terrible blow.
And the economy pretty much showed all small businesses the middle finger, and the clientele was ever harder to reach. The convention scene died, and we had just made a beautiful product with a glorious book, which is really gorgeous. And it would have been important to show it to people. We couldn't show it to anyone, and that turned into quite a big problem. That was the time where we had a big streak of luck, because we were talking with a friend of ours who is Olli, also known as Der Olli, from the Dr. Freud team, which is the streaming group of LeFloid, one of the most well-known German streamers. He is also the first YouTuber who interviewed Chancellor Merkel. Why do I call her Merkel instead of Merkel? I speak German. Pathetic. Anyway, so we got to talk to each other, and Olli said, we would like to do some role-playing, but we don't have time. We do not have private time at all. So if we want to get into role-playing, we have to do it in our work time, which means we have to stream it. Do you have some advice for us? So from advice, pretty much turned into, we will create something for you and play it with you and sell it in addition to that. So that is how we really got started with our own system and with our own campaign set up, our product concept, and everything else evolved from that like a blossom, actually. It bloomed.
We actually reworked everything. We kind of were in the middle of a project, well, early stages. And Olli said, would you like to stream with us? And we basically said, yeah, sure, okay. In 6 weeks, right? So the lockdowns came, and there was no in 6 weeks. There was no in 6 months either, I believe. 2021 in August was when we started.
Yeah. We had to wait out the total lockdowns. And on top of that, you could hardly sell a game to people that should be played at a table at a time where all of them could not meet their friends at all.
Especially since we are a physical first company. We create physical experience first and digital adaptation second. That's really important to us because we believe, as we said, it's all about that communal effect, and role-playing games are a very social experience. And what we do is we create experiences. We don't think of ourselves as pure game designers. It evolved out of that stream, actually. We wanted to do a little product, like a small book or something, right? And then we had 1.5 years to create it. So we finalized our own rule system. That's the Icarus Adventure System. From there, we thought, one book, why not do an entire campaign? So we created the Freude schöner Götterfunken box that is part of the Ode to Joy in German, has a double entendre in it.
Freude schöner Götterfunken is the first line of the Ode to Joy from Friedrich Schiller. In English, it would be, joy, thou shining spark of God.
It doesn't work in English, actually. Not at all. And it was a very complicated and big project. Freude schöner Götterfunken, our first campaign box, or as we usually call it, a enclosed experience, because everything you need to play it is in it. Just to throw some data, it includes about 430 playing cards, big and small, 4 books, I believe 16 maps in A3 format, 20 characters. Also created a handout package by now with about, I don't know, even more things in it, like 50 letters and 3 newspapers. It's a lot.
Eventually, it turned out to be one of the most extensive role-playing products ever singularly made. It's 3.8 kilograms of gaming material for the entire campaign, and few games ever managed to beat that. So we should talk about what it's about. So Freude schöner Götterfunken is some kind of road movie campaign, and it takes place in the year 1917, near the end of the First World War. And the protagonists that you take over as player characters in this story are the second-line heroes, the most unlikely heroes, like the Austro-Hungarian army cook or his assistant, the traveling female propaganda photographer, the donkey guide,
a local trader, people like that. And the area it takes place in is the Carpathian Mountains on the Eastern Front in the, how do you call it, the Dreiländereck?
Oh, I'm not sure.
The area where Romania, today's Ukraine, and Hungary come together. And it's a fictionalized version of that, of course. And the players get into these mystery horror road movies where they slowly leave the more or less, I don't know, normal life of this stalemated front It's not like on the Western Front, though. It's very important to know. The Eastern Front in Austria-Hungary was very different from the West. And they leave the front area, get into local affairs, get cut off, and then dive into those old mysteries of the area.
The further you move away from the relative civilization, the military encampment where it all starts out, the more you move away from the old theater of the war, and the deeper you delve into the old mysteries of the land and some forgotten horrors. And it becomes increasingly more mystery genre the further it goes on. But essentially, even though it has some Cthulhu-esque elements, it is mostly a game about humanity and friendship and sacrifice. It's not Lovecraftian very much, but well, the whole genre of Lovecraftian horror has a wide range, a very wide range, and we see ourselves more on the mundane end of that range. It's a bit of salt in the soup, as we would say in Germany, spicing things up.
We also had some help from a scientist. It's Dr. Tamara Scheer. She's a scientist at the University of Vienna. She's a specialist in Austro-Hungarian history, mostly languages and the war, not from a military perspective, but from what it did to people. We got into touch with her when we read her very funny book, Von Friedensfurien und dalmatinischen Küstenrehen. I don't know how to translate that. It's all about interesting words from the period that people have forgot by now. And Friedensfurien and Küstenrehe were basically tongue-in-cheek versions of, well, Friedensfurien were a certain kind of woman, and dalmatinische Küstenrehe were some kind of sheep, not a coastal deer, as the name suggests. And through that, we kind of just thought, hey, that reads really interesting. Maybe we should just send her an email and ask her some questions. And then she started getting back to us and giving us some information here and there and some links and photographs, and helped out very much. That's also why she's one of the characters in the game. Because one thing that's different from most role-playing games is that our enclosed experience also means we have 20 characters that are pre-made, but they're specifically crafted for that campaign. They have tie-ins into the story, they have tie-ins into the area, they work well together so that everyone has a part to play. And the experience from all our players so far was very positive, actually, because you can choose from 20. And it's usually enough for everyone to get someone he likes. And the way we work in character design is that we don't give you the personality of a person. We just tell you where he comes from. And how you try to give life to this character is entirely up to you.
So yeah, you get the abilities of the character and the background, but we don't tell you how to play that character. You're not reduced to the role of an actor. So you still fill that character with life of your own, and you can play the characters pretty much any way you want within the frames that they're set in. But we realized that we would have to do this also in communication with the role players and with our community, because most people, without reading an extensive amount of literature, would be mostly unable to create an interesting character for the Eastern Front of the First World War in the Austro-Hungarian Empire without defaulting heavily on cliches and on archetypes, and without over-militarizing it. Because the thing is that this campaign is not a military campaign. Half of the characters are soldiers, and it all starts out with orders and rifles, and you go here and you do that, but it doesn't end like that, and it doesn't evolve along those lines. And half the characters are not in the military specifically, because there is some, for example, very difficult thing is coming up with interesting female roles for that time without being cheap. Of course, we have a nurse that is a character, but you can't say, hey, in case you are a group of 5 women who want to play this, how about you all play nurses? That's demeaning, and that's not fun. And finding interesting roles for specific exceptions is hard. And that is also a reason why we needed Dr. Tamara Scheer for scientific counsel, because she came up with a few character options that we could never have thought of, because even we lacked the knowledge that those existed.
Yeah, and getting good sources is really hard, especially for Austria-Hungary, because, well, you have a certain amount of sources for Germany, but Austria-Hungary is somewhat under-researched, and there's also the problem some of Austria-Hungary is in Hungary now, and I don't speak one word of Hungarian.
Yeah. And for example, very few people would probably know that there were women in the Austro-Hungarian army in uniform off rank fighting in the war in the Rusanian Legion, which is the volunteer corps of the area that is Ukraine today.
Yeah, the ethnical Ukrainians in the emperor's forces.
That allowed us to create a wide range of characters that few people would have come up on their own.
There was also a certain problem when the war in Ukraine started, because we were doing something exactly in that area. It was about independence of Ukraine, because some characters and some arcs in the campaign are actually about Ukrainian independence movements back in the day. They're not really important, but they're there. So we had to kind of put in 2 extra months to give it the proper amount of work that it deserved, because we wanted to give it some spotlight, because it was just important to show that this war is not new and that Russian propaganda actually is propaganda, because Ukraine has had a very long history going back, well, in some readings about to 1648 when you talk about the modern Ukrainian state. One thing that makes Austria-Hungary very special is the fact that it's a multi-ethnic state. You had 17 official ethnicities or Völker, that is peoples, in the empire. That's a lot. And getting all those ethnicities properly arranged and giving them a proper treatment as a character is really hard. And so we thought, no, we will not give you a character creation system. We'll give you created characters, but they will be good. That was our promise to all the people that bought it. We will give you good characters, well-designed, well-researched, interesting, and with special abilities and everything that we create just for this character.
Okay, so maybe now is the good time to talk a little bit about the rules there. You said it's called the Icarus system.
Everything has a reason when we do it.
The foundation of the Icarus system is basically the central topics of heroic stories since the antique. That a hero becomes a hero through sacrifice. And he sacrifices blood, sweat, and tears, which is also why the system was almost named the Winston game engine, based on Winston Churchill's blood, sweat, and tear speech. But eventually it became the Icarus system. And it's the Icarus system because that's another fun fact. Most people only remember half of the Icarus story. When most people think of Daedalus and Icarus, they think of it as don't fly too high.
Supposed to keep you down in your place. Don't aspire to reach the sun. But the second half of the Icarus myth is actually don't fly too low, because your wings might get soaked with salt water.
Your wings might get soaked with salt water and you will plummet into the sea. So the core of the Icarus adventure system is maintaining on your own. You as a gamer, as a player, with your character, have to maintain a balance between your aspirations and your desire for success and your acceptance of drawbacks and cutbacks. So you need to maintain the correct attitude to succeed. So come to think of it, we could also have named it Flappy Bird system. Well, the thing is, most role-playing games, gamistically speaking, are failure engines. They are designed to cause failure. For example, pretty much every D20 system causes critical failures in 5% of all cases, and critical successes, on the other hand, in 5% of all cases. And many systems are not designed to be constantly used for each and every task. And if you do that, you will quickly create disasters. Also, sometimes characters can't do things that they should be able to do. So we worked from a different perspective. We said, okay, things that are hilariously easy should always succeed. Things that are hard, those are the things you want to check for. And when you are doing something that is really hard, it is not just for the dice to decide whether you succeed or not, but it is also for you to decide. And that is where sacrifice comes into play. Because in our game system, you make a check, you build a pool, and you buy some dice from that pool, and you roll the dice, and then you count it up. And if the result is to your liking, well, lucky you. And if it isn't, you can decide to sacrifice certain things. You can sacrifice blood, sweat, and tears, the 3 basic reserves, which is health, endurance, and morale. And you can also sacrifice equipment.
Represented as inventory cards. You actually sacrifice things you have, because the 3 reserves are also represented as tokens. You have the cards and tokens, and when you spend things or sacrifice things, you can physically get rid of them. That's also part of that entire physical first company concept. And what's really important to us is we always work from the philosophical core from our system, and that is everything has a price. you can succeed if you want to, but it will have a great price. And down the line, it will maybe bite you in the ass unless you get lucky or you're just, well, clever somehow. That's also possible, but you might just overdo it at some point and then break down in a moment you really didn't want it to.
So in our system, you will never lose any equipment out of malice or caprice or based on an arbitrary decision of your game master. You lose things because you have decided specifically that you lose those things, and you want to lose those things because it gives you an edge. And that was to us a very interesting concept because loss is usually problematic in games. It can lead to conflict at the gaming table, but it is also unreliable and completely arbitrary. If you fail a check and the game master allows you to succeed, but the game master tends to decide what the but is, and usually it's you. So that no one is the ass of that joke, we make you happy for losing things. So the gamers gleefully lose their most valued possessions and important things because it allows them to succeed. And if they over-succeed, we have Icarus again. If they fly too high, if they always want the best level of success, they will over-exhaust themselves. And they will drain their characters of valuable resources and of valuable reserves. That will bite you in the rear eventually. And that eventually part is also very important to us because we consider every played character as a protagonist in a story, not a random figure in some environment. And protagonists cannot critically fail during the first stage of a story. They cannot die because if they did, they never were the protagonists in the first place. So in our system, they cannot fail unless they decide to do so in the early stages, but they will rue their decisions in the finale if they overexhausted themselves. But that's okay because in the finale, the protagonists, they can die, they can get maimed, they can vanish forever. It doesn't matter because they have fulfilled their purpose of getting through the story, experiencing this story, and having fun together. They are not needed afterwards because it is one closed campaign and it is not a setting world in that case.
I believe during the stream of Freude schöner Götterfunken, only one character survived in the end, but they all reached the end. And it was great. People actually cried. It was great to make people cry, actually.
Since we played that with Dr. Freud on Twitch, it was very emotional and it convinced us that this whole rules concept and that story concept, the whole approach, was actually working. So this was the public prototype on test for everyone to see. People who were just watching the stream understood the rules very quickly, which was also very reinforcing to us. The players understood the rules and learned quickly to work with them and work tactically with them. The whole concept worked out dramaturgically. So without any manipulation or behind-the-scenes talks, we got through a few very dramatic situations in the live stream that were entertaining both to the viewers and to the players. That actually was quite a crowning moment for the whole concept. And that convinced us that this will work very well.
There was also, hard numbers that convinced us. We had over 1 million viewers over the entire time of the stream. That was a lot, actually, especially for a first-time role-playing project in Germany, on Twitch. We got a lot of feedback, actually, from all over Europe. Many people actually said it was great to see their little part of Europe being represented in a role-playing game because role-playing games apparently don't feature Slovenians very often, or Ukrainians, or Polish people, and so on.
As a game master, I portrayed, obviously, a lot of different NPCs. And I got feedback from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary, from Russia, even though the Russians were kind of the bad guys in that story. But they were very charismatic and cool bad guys. And, pretty much everyone was happy with it.
It was very motivating. Didn't one of our games get exploded in Bakhmut? Or was it just the car of the guy who played it? You were in contact with one person who was actually fighting in Bakhmut.
Well, I was in contact with 2 Ukrainian people who had watched Freude schöner Götterfunken in the live stream. One of them had watched it and one of them had bought our game. And his game was lost in some kind of front movement where it had to be left behind. Nobody knows. Probably some Russians are playing it right now if they know German. But yeah, 2 fans there in the front region that gave me feedback.
It was very weird to get contact with people like that. Usually you don't get viewer feedback or player feedback from the people that are basically telling you, yesterday I was running ammunition to Bakhmut. Interesting. That made the success even more remarkable because the German market isn't that big and German role-playing streaming is also not that big.
Well, and sales of the game, which we sold alongside the streams, sales were also pretty good. And we had hundreds of customers that bought the game who had never before played role-playing games and who started with this big box of everything. And the feedback from those people was overwhelmingly positive too.
We put a lot of work in to make it playable for everyone. That's also part of that complete experience in a box concept. We want you to be able to play from minute one. As I said earlier, there were 4 books in it, and one of them was basically a history book, the History Almanac. It was like 80 pages or something. Basically, just a view around Austria-Hungary, living in cities, living in the countryside, technical things like weather radios and so on. Just to get you into spirit. It's very interesting to most people. People liked it. It was very nice to hear because I studied history and I had some help from Dr. Tamara Scher. Going onward from Feuerschöner Götterfunken, we plan to do more. And there is more in the works. We did a second stream with Dr. Freud somewhat later because, well, as most first-time big projects, it took longer than we expected. This was also part of that. If you get into role-playing games, get into logistics, please. We kind of took a year or so extra to get it out. But when it got out, people forgave us our, how would I say, tardiness. We weren't specifically tardy, but we took forever because we're perfectionists. And we just can't stop until everything is polished to the level of quality that we desire it to be, because it's just how we roll. But that's also what our community likes about us. Basically, it's like the old Blizzard. It's done when it's done. And when we get it out, it will be great.
We have learned, for example, that we don't really give out deadlines anymore. We give a rough estimate and we are glad if we can make that, but it's nothing that we would lose sleep over. But people actually appreciate it. Negative feedback in that regard was absolutely minimal in contrast to the positive feedback. We have built a surprisingly strong and big community ever since, which actually surprised us. We had not figured that in. Within half a year of the stream, a fan club had founded itself and registered as an official club by German law. And there was a community meeting in Bingen, where we also went and met about 30 people. From those grassroots, it grew. And then there was a role-playing convention from the club organized in a castle on a mountain a year later.
Last weekend, we went to the second Wolpercon. It's named after our mascot, the Wolperratte. They sometimes love our mascot more than our games.
So yeah, we have a fan club now, and that fan club made a community meet and 2 conventions. So this is growing rather well, much better than we had expected.
We're currently working on our second campaign box that got financed last November. We also streamed that one. It was a shorter stream, and we crowdfunded the game this time. It was actually a huge success. We had about, don't let me lie, 450 supporters or something like that, but 85,000 euros in funding. That's a lot for Germany.
Money-wise, it was actually the most successful indie crowdfunding in German role-playing so far.
That's a huge success, especially as we found out that half of our supporters bought the biggest package, which was crazy for us. We would never have thought that we had like 200 or 250 people who were hardcore supporters who wanted the collector's edition and everything. We kind of targeted for 40,000 or something, and we went to 85,000. Of course, again, eco-print in Germany, right? So it's all slightly more expensive. If we were printing in Latvia or China, we could save about 45%, but we simply won't do that. Chained to heavyweights whilst running.
So you're based in Berlin, and I had some previous interviews with people who were there when the role-playing game scene started in Germany, and they're mostly from Western Germany. So how is Berlin different, or how's the gaming scene in Berlin in general?
Well, since Toby can't say much about that because he was never really part of the Berlin gaming scene, him being from Switzerland, the thing is Berlin had a very vibrant role-playing scene back in the days. And back in the days is, well, over 15 years ago and more. We had lots of gaming stores in Berlin, and pretty much every gaming store in Berlin was a perfectly healthy nucleus for the local gaming scene. Then we had lots of general game stores that were not specifically about role-playing games, which also had some role-playing games in their shelves, especially, of course, due to Schmidt Spiele. Schmidt Spiele was the gaming giant behind The Dark Eye, and they more or less forced everyone who bought their games to also sell The Dark Eye, which was part of the big success of The Dark Eye. There was a lot of RPG gaming in Berlin. We had many meets in local stores where people just got together and played. And then two things happened. First, collectible card games turned up. And collectible card games destroyed the gaming scene in Berlin because all of a sudden the stores were filled with children. Smaller children than what you could play role-playing games with, and also they were not interested. They wanted magic cards and they wanted Pokemon. But they sat on all the tables, and the store owners were pretty happy about that because for a while they thought that this would make them a lot of money. It turned out it didn't, because first of all, they drove off all the other customers. It also turned out that school children are a lot more likely to steal at such a shop than adults are. I knew a few stores that pretty much went belly up in that time because lots of things were stolen, mostly for no good reason. For example, expensive Warhammer 40k miniatures and such things, they just vanished off the shelves. Then the store owners started to glass up the minis. The people who wanted to buy minis didn't want to browse glass vitrines, and so they stopped buying them. And that was this. So on the other hand, computer games got a lot better at precisely that same time. And that drew exactly, I think, one generation away from role-playing games. Well, since some of the larger gaming companies, both here in Germany and in the US, also bankrupted at that time and they had overextended, the whole market collapsed in itself and the Berlin RPG scene never really recovered from that. We are but a shadow from what we have been once. It might change for good because role-playing games, at least in the US, are a booming market with lots of prospect. And I think they will be the same here, and they should be. And we believe they can be, which is why we do what we do. There is hope. This is why we create our games the way we create our games, because we want people to pick up the game and play it with their friends without ever thinking about, do I have to buy 20 other books to play it? Do I have to read through a metric ton of rules to know it and to play it? Because everything you need is in that box, and the core rules are rather easy to learn. Actually, it's the other way around. Our core rules are a bit harder to learn than the rules of most other RPGs, but we do not have the encumbrance of all the complicated special rules that other games have because, well, we consider it quite well designed and it is easy to adapt. So once you have learned the core system, you can do a lot with it.
15 minutes. That's usually what it takes people to learn the basics, sometimes just from watching other people play. That's just an experience we have by now. If you want to read the entire rule book with every example, it maybe takes you an hour or maybe 75 minutes.
The goal is if you pick up one of our games, in 99 out of 100 cases, you should have fun.
To talk about the Berlin scene for one more moment, I think there's also a geographical problem for Berlin because it's just inside of Brandenburg, and Brandenburg is somewhat rural. There's just not very much going on there. And on the other side of Germany, in Western Germany, in the Ruhrpott, you have all those little middle towns, like Düsseldorf, Cologne, Essen, and how they're all called.
They will get angry if you call them middle towns.
Yes, some of them have almost 1 million people, but okay, anyway.
Most of them have 200,000 or so, and that should be the definition of a medium-sized city, their own ecospheres. And if you don't have a convention in Cologne, you maybe have a convention in Dortmund, and if it's not in Dortmund, you have one in Frankfurt, and you can reach all that in maybe 2 or 3 hours if it's one of the further away cities. And the entire of Brandenburg where nothing is happening. And so if it's not in Berlin, it's not happening, and Berlin is only one city when it comes to role-playing games.
Actually, there is not only Brandenburg, there is the entirety of Eastern Germany. With less dense in population, weaker in infrastructure, and it has fewer role players by tradition. So as a Berlin gamer, if you want to meet other gamers that are not from Berlin, you usually have to travel far. And if you can't do that, this is something you're just lacking.
And all the big conventions are also not in this part of Germany. So if you want to get to those, to get the word out about your product, for example, you have to travel again. The most important German role-playing game convention is the Dreieich-Con, and that's near Frankfurt. That's 7.5 hours from here, if traffic is normal.
So yeah, that can be quite exhausting to get there and back. Which is why we as a Donnerhaus studio, we cannot be on as many conventions as the West German small publishers can be, because half of the conventions are right around their doorstep. And for us, it's always a big act of organization. We need to get a van, we need to get a driver, we need to get there and we need to get back. And this eats a lot of time. Every convention consumes about 1 week of work time in addition to the convention, due to preparing for it, recovering from it, and actually being there. And that cuts quite deeply into our work budget.
Yeah, and finances are actually quite hard as a small studio because you don't have much investment into role-playing games. Germany is just a very small scene and small market. So if you're just starting up, you have all those, well, actually, it's just the old problems that every industry has, right? Bureaucracy, which is quite cumbersome. We pay a lot of money just to get taxes right and to keep accounting right and finding logistical partners, and everything you need to do yourself because there's no one you can pay because you don't have the money for it. So growing is hard because we're so small that we don't reach that threshold of economy of scale that just gets you flying, right? So we kind of had to walk through those years of darkness in the pandemic to now kind of get started for real. But we actually rather, hopeful, I'd say, for the future, because we also talked to some international visitors of the DreieichCon, mostly from Sweden and from America. There was some guy from Ireland. They all were very interested in our games, and that gave us some hope that we might be able to find some international success down the line.
Which is something that is severely lacking in the German role-playing scene as a whole. Germany is almost entirely an import market for role-playing game systems, and we barely export anything. All the big systems in Germany, except the Dark Eye, are import systems like Shadowrun and Call of Cthulhu and all of that. Usually games that are successful in the US will be published in German. Games that are successful in Scandinavia will be published in German, and nothing that is published in German will ever get anywhere else. We hope we can break that curse at some point. We know many have tried, some have tried over and over again. And so far, the only one who has succeeded doing that somehow was Ulysses Spiele. And they themselves and the gods know they tried before and failed. So it's not an easy task. But I think we have an advantage there because our system is so self-encompassing and it's all in one box. So we don't have to promise people that we will support that. We can just give them the product and it's finished.
Yeah, it's a bit like the hybridization of markets. We have seen a big success in tabletop games and board games lately, especially in crowdfundings. And we think that's a great concept for people to just get something they can play. And once they're done, they can put it back into their shelves and look at it from time to time or take it out a year or two later and play it again, because it's definitely possible. That's also why we focus on quality so much, because if we are cheap now, we will never be able to get it to an international market. And to be honest, the German market is just slightly too small. We can sustain ourselves here, but we kind of don't want just to be sustaining. We want to grow and create cool things, and you need more than 2 people to create really cool things in a time frame that is more realistic than, well, we'll just be working on it for 18 months now. Sometimes you want to be slightly faster. That means more people.
And finally, I was lucky to get a hold of Germany's largest indie publisher.
Yeah, hello, I'm Patrick. I'm one of the 2 founders of the Systemetas Verlag. Verlag. It's interesting because Americans have almost problems with Verlag. I got to RPGs when I was 13 years with the usual Das Schwarze Auge, like I think half of the German RPG scene. I played it very long. I think there was a break when school ended as I got to university because friendships changed and people changed. But I've played it very long. Then I met Daniel, and this opened a greater view of RPGs, I have to say. We played Cthulhu a lot and tried out other things, and this led us to the situation we are in now.
I'm Daniel. I'm the other founder of Systemetas publishing house, and I've also started with Das Schwarze Auge, but I wanted the board game for Christmas when I was 12 or 13. But my uncle didn't find the board game. He found the role-playing game, and that was my gift for Christmas. And after that, I was hooked. Before that, I played some choose-your-own-adventure books. I suppose Patrick played also some of these books as well. I worked for the German Cthulhu and always were writing about role-playing games. And after a long time, we started a publishing house and translate role-playing games ourselves.
Okay, but you are based in Germany, in Gelsenkirchen, if I'm not mistaken, so in the West. I'm just pointing that out to make it clear that in Germany, that's all over the place, and mostly in Northern Germany and Western Germany, all the publishers. But you have an English name, so how come? Why are you called System Matters?
We started as a podcast as well. In 2009, we created a podcast together with Matthias, who is left as we started the company because he was more in the podcast and just for fun. And it was the kind of the discussion about how much our RPG system is important for the game itself. So the rules, how much are they impacting the game? And so we got System Matters at the time.
It was the early 2000s, I think, and The Forge was really big. It's a huge discussion about games, role-playing games, and what are role-playing games and how do they work. This short term was a good name for a podcast.
Okay, and then you became a publisher a couple of years later. So what games do you have? Let's start with that.
We publish a lot of different games, but our main idea was to publish games in Germany that don't need a lot of time to prepare. The main games in Germany were big games like Das Schwarze Auge or Shadowrun. We always loved smaller games, the niche games, something like Dread, the horror game with the Jenga tower. Or we wanted to publish Powered by the Apocalypse games that were missing on the market. Fate was already published, but no Powered by the Apocalypse games. So we started with that, and that's the first part of our publishing house. And the second part is the old school role-playing renaissance or movement. I really like OSR games and all the games around that. For example, we published Beyond the Walls. That was our first game. It's a game about young heroes and going on adventure like Taran und der Zauberkessel. It's in German.
The Black Cauldron.
Yes, by Lloyd Alexander. And that is an OSR game with some tweaks and some changes. Not like the classic Moldway box or the basic box or something like that. And we are also the publisher of Dungeon Core Classics. That's also not a completely OSR game, but it's in the style of old school gaming. And these are the main two parts of our publishing house.
And which game is the most popular of the ones you have?
I think it's one Daniel hasn't mentioned before. It's Mausritter, where you play mouses who try to discover our world. And it's very popular because it's kind of cute, but also not just a game for kids.
The title was very easy to translate.
Yeah, it's called Mausritter in the English original. I've actually run it once, so I'm aware of the game, but I didn't figure out how to do it properly, I think.
All mouse knights are really fragile. They die a lot in these games. It's also part of the old school movement, but it's more a close relative to other old school games.
So which were the most difficult to translate?
Oh boy, that's a long story. Dungeon Core Classics was difficult because it was so long. It's a book with 480 pages that took a long time. We also translated Dungeon Core Classics Langmar, based on the stories by Fritz Leiber. That was also difficult to translate because we have in Germany 2 translations of the original stories by Fritz Leiber. And we had to work with the newest one, and there weren't any ebooks. So you have to read 4 big books with stories and make a glossary on your own and start working on the translation of the DCC books, which were also a lot of pages. But when you look at something like Electric Bastionland by Chris McDowell, that it's not a lot of text, but it's really difficult because of his wordplay. We talked a lot about the job descriptions and the names for the different jobs. It's a take on Into the Odd, and you start with a random job. That's your character class, and you are 10,000 pounds in debt. That starts your adventure. And each job is very distinct, and it's very complicated to translate. That was hard. We did the dungeon alphabet from Goodman Games, and that was also difficult because we would like to keep the alphabet. We want an ABC and not an ABD. And we could manage to find all words except the C. For C, we had to write a new one, or Michael Curtis wrote a new C. C stands for Chiffren. That was also very hard to translate, and it took a long time. Patrick, do you know other books that were difficult to translate?
I just heard the stories because I'm very late in the process of producing a book because we've separated the department of our company. That sounds so big, but we've separated these. But I think about the Blades in the Dark, what you have to translate, that's often the question, do you translate names or leave it in the original language? And Blades in the Dark, it was very important because you have the growth, it's a gang. Do you translate them in German? Then you have also to think about the district they're living in. So that's the difficulties you have when you think about translating names. I think we left them in the original language, but
it's like the Sherlock Holmes stories in German. All places in London are not translated. You still have Baker Street and not Bakerstraße.
But for example, we translated Shadow of the Demon Lord. We translated it because it's a mechanic in the game. It's a part of the game, so we translated it.
Blades in the Dark is difficult to translate in German. It loses a little bit when you translate it in German, but Shadow of the Demon Lord was a good title to translate.
How about the gendered aspect of the German language?
That's really complicated, yes. German is not good in gender-neutral language, so it's a little bit complicated. But we try our best to have everybody mentioned in the text, but sometimes it's not easy, and it's a lot of work, I have to say.
So how do you tackle it?
Sometimes we use a star in the words, or we try to use gender-neutral language.
It's a bit different from project to project. In some projects, we just use the female form. In other books, we alternate. So we have the female game master and the players. It's difficult to display in English because there is no difference, but that's how we do it. In some places, we use signs.
The problem with translating, and it's mostly from English, German is a lot longer than the English language. So you have sometimes problems with the layout files. You can change the complete layout, that's a lot of work, or you can reduce the font size, which is also very complicated. I've seen everybody here wears glasses, and that's a bit difficult. That's really complicated to translate.
That's the reason why our Blades in the Dark, for example, is bigger than the original one, while Monster Hearts, you already mentioned it, is completely redesigned, or a Dungeon World we also made complete new, because we could make it there and it worked. But some books, or we also made World Wide Wrestling, and there you need the double pages sometimes. So you can't change the layout. You need to change the size of the book, not the font. And Dungeon Alphabet, for example, we made as a coffee book. Some customers said they can't put it in their shelves. It's a pity, yes.
Maybe for the listeners, in Germany, the book size is different than the American ones. They're usually bigger, actually, so the shelves have a different size. But the World Wide Wrestling, you'll hear more about that actually in the teaser for the next episode, because then I'll interview someone who has an actual play about that in his native language. So that's like the teaser to the next one. And do you have any original German games on your portfolio?
Only few. We're working with some authors together. We had traveled to Die Show, for example. It's one of our small books. We have a collection of small role-playing games. It's one way you build dice towers and select your outcome by this. And it supposes peaceful ways, for example. Often we have German adventures. We have a book about adventure design that's quite popular, I think. Abenteuer gestalten in German. That's the greatest German project by us, you can say.
We often change layouts and illustrations in the books, like Monster Hearts or Beyond the Wall. We change some things, but it's mostly writing new adventures or new material for existing games we have translated.
If I'm looking at your web shop, I see Abenteuer im Märchenwald. Is that a German product?
Yes, that is a German project. It's by Katrin Fischer, and it's a game for schools. It's part of the curriculum in 5th grade, I think. It's about German folk tales. And you play the Bremer Stadtmusikanten.
The city musicians of Bremen.
Yes, and you have to find the dwarfs of Snow White and have to solve some riddles and some problems. But yes, that's an original German game, yes.
And another one I see is Gegen alle Stürme by Jörg Köster.
It's not published yet. We are still working on it. It was crowdfunding we did earlier this year, and it's a game with the PBTA engine.
I'm just saying on the cover, it has airships with a female wizard flying and lightnings around her, and there's something that looks like a blue jay with a rifle. It's quite an amazing picture.
Yes. Yes, it's pulpy, and you play sky pirates, and you are also design the world before you play.
And so you also said you have some German material or adventures for existing systems. Are these then like German adaptations or German setting pieces for an existing game?
For example, for Beyond the Wall, we created new adventures. We combined them with the original English character books that were published, and we upgraded the books with new adventure materials. These are just adventures. Or for DCC, we have fanzine like the Trichter. It's a funnel German, and there are adventures for this. Even a tournament adventure for DCC we created.
We also did a translation of the small storytelling game Don't Walk in Winter Woods. We had the chance to write some new adventures for that, and some are also in the original setting in the 1800s in North America, like the movie The Village. But we also did some adventures based in Europe, and one was in ancient Greece, and another one was in Germany, also in the 1900s, I think. We have a dread adventure with zombies based in a larger German city. It's not written down. It starts in a subway, so you can place it in every German city where there's a subway. There's also a university who works on zombie stuff. So it's basically no German city, but I hope. Some Beyond the Wall adventures have some folktales in mind, I think, but not so heavy as Abenteuer im Märchenwald, adventures in the fairy forest. We have a DCC adventure written. I've written it with Andreas Mehlhorn, and there's a lot of German things in it. It's located in the Black Forest, and it has some themes from the Nibelungen with Alberich, the dwarf, the master smith. And it's a dungeon crawl with a huge Kuckuck's clock in a mountain top. But it's not published yet.
Yeah, but that sounds very German.
Yes.
I always found it funny in the old White Wolf books when they talk about the Black Forest. They made it like, ooh, the Black Forest. And in Germany, that region is actually kind of like cozy. So it's not really that scary. I mean, lots of fairy tales take place there, so it kind of fits, but it's more like a cozy place, and the German dialect there is very cute. So it's not really a scary place, yeah.
Not really. I think we also worked in it Das kalte Herz, The Cold Heart, a folktale by Wilhelm Hauff.
So thank you for listening to episode 15 of The World of RPGs. The intro music was Battle of the Dragons by Thomas Mutziu, and the logo is by Ayberk Karakas. A special thanks goes out to all my interviewees in Germany that helped bring this together. I also want to thank Carsten Schmidt, Tobias Schulte-Krumpen, and the Facebook group Pen and Paper Rollenspiel for advice and helping connect with people. Is there anything I left out of the episode? Yes, an enormous amount of material. For example, there's nothing on Engel. I didn't interview any gaming clubs. And who's this Orkenspalter everyone in Germany talks about? All right, I left the latter one out on purpose because I have some recommendations. As always, you can find links to everyone I interviewed who have websites or have games or actual plays and more in the show notes of this podcast. I especially recommend checking out Obscuriat Valser and all the indie publishers in this last part. If you want to hear more about the German gaming scene, 2 YouTube channels in English, Don't Stop Thinking and Polishing RPGs, have interviews with Mayre Stritter from Orkenspalter. So Orkenspalter is an actual play channel in Germany. And again, you can find links to those talks in the show notes. As for episode 16, well, I need some rest after this one. So let's do some smaller countries before I tackle France or Sweden. So don't get confused. This will not be another Germany episode, but it will be a translation of Worldwide Wrestling, as Daniel and Patrick from System Matters mentioned.
Ein furioser Start gleich vom Candy Crusher, der lässt sich ja keine Sekunde zu viel Zeit. Offenbar hat er das letzte Match gegen La Ballerina Brutal nicht gut verdaut.
Ja, ich glaube, er hat auch gesehen, dass die Sache mit dem Entertainment Vor- und Nachteile hat. Es geht auch um die Action im Ring. Okay, 7 bis 9, das bedeutet, wähle, ob du die Kontrolle über das Match übergibst und ein Momentum erhältst oder die Kontrolle behältst.
Ich gebe sie ab und nehme ein Momentum.
Ballerina, wie reagierst du?
Ja, also wie reagiere ich? Gut, ich bin hier jetzt in der Mitte des Rings und spring gleich mal und strecke ihn mit einem Dropkick nieder und bin auch schon auf ihm drauf und pinne ihn das erste Mal ganz provokant. Und man sieht, ich habe auch einen von diesen Ringen auf, diese Diamantringe, die aus Zucker sind. Und während ich ihn so pinne, lecke ich noch so über diesen Zuckerring und lache ihm dabei ins Gesicht.
Für die Aktion kriegst du billige Punkte. Nimm dir bitte ein Momentum.
Jawohl.
Das ist sehr healig. Ja, und die Ringrichterin ist da und macht 1, 2.
Da muss ich würfeln, oder?